This video will work through problem 5.6 in Gapenski's Healthcare Finance 6th edition. In problem 5.6, we are asked to build a P&L based on the data from 5.5 and then do a series of different levels of visits and estimate how the P&L looks for each one. So they want us to do 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12,000 visits. So first, we have to start with estimating our revenue. Well, if you remember from 5.5, we knew that we had 400,000 in revenue and we had 10,000 visits. So we estimated that revenues were going to be $40 per visit. So we're going to take and say our dollars per visit is 40. I'll lock that reference, times the number of visits we're doing. So that's, in this case, 8,000. We get 320,000. So using the magic of Excel, I can just copy that formula across. Then we knew med supplies and admin supplies were our variable costs. So med supplies were a total of 50,000 for 10,000 visits, which gives us an average of $5 per visit. And then admin supplies were $10,000 for 10,000 visits, which gives us an average of $1 per visit for admin supplies. So again, I'm going to multiply the $5 times our 8,000 visits. And this technique where I'm putting the dollar sign in order to lock your reference, you just hit the F4 key on your keyboard if you're using a Windows machine, and then click on the number and that puts it in. So 40,000, so 5 times 8,000 is 40,000. And then our dollar, again, lock it, times 8,000 gives us 8,000, of course. And then I can just copy the formulas across. So that just makes us a little faster. And then we have total variable cost is the sum of our two variable costs as 48,000. We can copy that across. And finally, our contribution margin is equal to our revenues minus our variable costs. So they are 272 for 8,000 up to 408,000 for 12,000. And then our fixed costs are wages at 220. Whoop, too many, that's too much. Our rent at 5,000. Our depreciation at 30,000. Our utilities at 2,500. And that's all for our fixed costs. We can add those up. And since they don't change because they're fixed, they don't vary based on the volume, I can just copy that across and populate that in. And so our taxable income is equal to our contribution margin minus our fixed costs. So we have a taxable income of 14,500 for 8,000 up to 150 for 12,000. And then we're going to pay income taxes of 30%. And so our profit is our taxable income minus our taxes. So we see a profit starting at 10,000 and going up to 105,000 based on our changes in volume. Okay, so then the second part of part A is asking, what is the clinic's degree of operating leverage at this volume level? Okay, so the degree of operating leverage is a measure of how responsive your pre-tax, pre-interest profit is with respect to changes in revenue. So it's really asking about, with respect to changes in volume. So it's really getting at the operating portion of the income statement. If you remember back from chapter 3, you remember that the first two sections of the income statement, the operating revenues and the operating expenses, are really what we're getting at. And we're comparing essentially how much does our operating income change as a result of a change in volume. So this comes out of the formula is available on page 198 of your text in the Chapter 5 supplement, but they don't really give a good explanation of the formula because they kind of leave out the fact that the actual formula is pre-tax and pre-interest. So in order to get the right formula, you have to remember that it is going to be pre-tax profit, right, as opposed to just simply profit divided by the contribution margin. So we're going to pick up the pre-tax profit, which is the taxable income, divided by the contribution margin. And whoop, did something wrong there. Equals pre-tax profit divided by the contribution margin. Sorry, other way around. Contribution margin. So it's the contribution margin divided by the pre-tax profit. Contribution margin divided by pre-tax profit, which gives you 4.121212, et cetera. So what does that mean? Well, that means that for a 1% change in volume, you're going to see a 4.12% change in pre-tax profit. So let's test that. Let's copy this column over. And we're going to ignore the last two portions, right? We're going to ignore the taxes and after-tax profit. And we're going to increase our volume by, say, 10%. So we'll multiply it by 1.1. Okay. So if we're expecting to see a 4% increase in pre-tax profit for every 1% change or increase in volume, then if we do a 10% increase in volume, we expect to see a 41% change in profit. Actually, I'm doing exactly what's over here in column I. All right, so I'm trying to be clever. All right, maybe I'm not so clever, but all right. So anyway, so how do we know if our expectation is correct? So we expect to see if we have a 10% increase, we expect to see a 41% increase in pre-tax revenue. So how much did we actually see? So we take our new pre-tax revenue minus our old pre-tax revenue. So that's the 82.5 that we had when we had 10,000 divided by our old pre-tax revenue, and we get 41.21%. So I can change that to a percent. Okay, so we have confirmed that. All right, so that is part A. Now assume that the base case volume is 9,000 visits. What is the DOL at this volume? All right, well, it's pretty simple. We can calculate the DOL again. So let me delete this. So then the DOL is the contribution margin divided by the pre-tax income, and we get 6.3. So at 9,000, it's more sensitive to a change in volume than it is at 10,000. So if we have a 10% increase in over our 9,000. So let's do that. Let's put in 9,000 over here now. So our columns match up, right? And we're going to increase that 9,000 by 10%, equals 9,000 times 1.1, and we get a pre-tax income of 79,100. So a 10% increase, we're expecting a 63.1% increase in pre-tax income. So let's test it and see if we're right. So we have, let me do that correctly. So we take the new minus the old divided by the old, and we get a 63.09%. So that shows you the accuracy. Okay, so that's the answer to the text. The other thing I was the point I was making was at 9,000, if 9,000 is your base case, you are more sensitive to a change in volume than you are here at 10,000. And that's because the fixed costs are larger relative to your contribution margin at 9,000 than they are at 10,000. The thing that's happening as we move to the right, and this also, by the way, works if we move to the left. So if we went from 9,000 to 90% of 9,000, a 10% decrease, you would have seen a 63% decrease in pre-tax profit as well. The thing that's happening as we move along is we're holding our fixed cost constant, right, all along, but we're getting more contribution margin relative to our fixed costs as we move up in volume and move our base case along in volume. So as we move to the right, as we move to a larger number of visits as our base case, we're going to be less and less sensitive to a small change in percent, less and less sensitive to a small percent change in volume. So if we move to the right, if we recalculate it again, right, we just take this and keep going, we'll see a smaller and smaller. So these are all the DOLs, right? And if we go to the right, we see an even more sensitive. And it's really because, again, it's based on a ratio of our contribution margin to our pre-tax income. And so you can see how big that ratio is down here at a small volume, and how much smaller it is, how much smaller that ratio is at a large volume.